Welcome back, viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome back for those who are not new to this channel, and for those who are new to this channel, thank you so much for tuning in. And don't change that dial before you've heard what it is that I'm going to be delivering today. Right. So in today's topic, I'm just going to deliver 10 myths about social work in England, which people do talk about out there, which may not necessarily be true. And I'm going to expand more in terms of those 10 myths. These are from my own experiences of interacting with families and interacting with children as well. And the reason why I'm delivering this topic today is because it is my wish that people do have a better understanding of the work that we do as social workers. So yes, if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so that when I post, you'll be the first person to know and you'll be able to watch what I would have posted and actually be able to share with friends and family. Right, so let me jump in straight into today's topic. Like I said earlier on, I'm going to be talking about 10 myths about social work in England, which are not necessarily true. First and foremost, I hear people talking about social workers do take children away from their families. This is something that you hear quite often when you do visits with children and families, really. But what I need to say today is, contrary to this myth, as social workers, it is not our wish to remove children from their families. It is our wish for children to remain within their families. Remember, it's so costly for children to be removed from their families because it's not going to be easy to remove a child from their family, from their friends whom they have known, to place them with people that they don't even know about, in foster care, for example, or even in supported accommodation, which is very, very expensive. Remember, foster care as well as supported living accommodation, wherever we place children in, they have to be paid. Sometimes it's weekly payment or sometimes it's monthly payment. It's a lot of money. So no social worker, believe me, would want to see a child being taken away from their family and put into foster care. Two, the other reason also why social workers, we are not keen on removing children from their families is because of a child who ends up being in care may not necessarily have positive outcomes as compared to other children who have never been in care as such. So looking at the outcomes as well, they're not going to be positive. I'm not saying all children who are in foster care are necessarily going to be having negative outcomes. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the majority of them who end up being in care, the outcomes may not necessarily be as positive as one would want. The third thing also which I want to say to bust this myth is that as social workers, remember, we do not have the power to remove children from their families. Social workers can only make a recommendation to court. It is the judge in a court of law who have got the power to actually give an order that will remove children from their families. The other authority who have got power to remove children, but it only lasts for 72 hours, is the police, under what we call police protection powers. So social workers do not have that power to remove children from their families. If usually social workers do respond in a crisis situation, they try to work with the family, try to work with the parents to identify any other safe individual or safe adult within the family or family network or within the friends network who is able to care for those children until the parents get some support and address the concerns which are being relayed in that particular case. So with regards to this first point, I actually need to emphasize that our primary goal as social workers is to create a safe and conducive environment for children so that families can stay together. If there are concerns around substance misuse, for example, if there are concerns around domestic abuse, all we need is to make sure that the parents or the adults around that particular child do engage with support services so that they address those concerns and the child should remain within their family. However, in situations where the risk is very high, remember, like what I said, social workers, we can recommend removal of children only if the situation is not tenable for that child to remain within that family. But the bottom line is, as social workers, we always strive to make sure that we improve family situations and children do remain with their families. Myth number 1, busted. Myth number 2, it says social work or social workers are not well paid. This is a bit debatable depending from which angle you try to tackle it. I think it's suffice to say social work is one of the most rewarding jobs, not only financially, but also you getting a sense of satisfaction or a sense of achievement after you have supported a family to avert disaster, for example, after you have supported a family from a situation where there was total dysfunction to a situation where things are normalized, situation where things have been addressed, relationships are actually have improved and so forth. So to actually bust this myth, what I would say is, the salaries social workers do get are kind of comparable to other public sector professions, really. So if you look at it, salaries for social workers, really, they are not a secret, because usually when one applies for a job, you will find that on each and every advert which is out there, the salary of a social worker is actually put out there and it's evident for everybody to see. So if you want to compare those salaries, depending with which local authority one is working for, and compare them to other public sector professions, you might find that they are kind of comparable, or sometimes, depending with how big the local authority it is, sometimes it's actually more than what an average worker would be getting, maybe either in private or sometimes in some public sector professions, really. So, at senior levels, I think the most important thing also is that to point out is that some senior social workers or some high-level social workers like service managers, team managers, and so forth, the salary is actually quite competitive, including directors, assistant directors, head of service, and so forth. You also need to take into account the fact that some social workers, when they are trainee social workers, for example, apprentices, they actually do get paid. So it's one of those professions where when you are under training, you can actually start to get paid. So to bust that myth, I would say the social workers' salaries are actually competitive. Point number 2, with regards to this same myth, is that, which I need to put out there, is, remember, it depends with whether a social worker is being employed as a permanent employee by a local authority or as a locum through an agency. And as you know, most people who are employed through agency, they actually get paid more, if not double, than what some other social workers who are working as permanent actually do get paid. So I think I've busted that myth, myth number 2. Moving on then to myth number 3, I also hear people argue that there is no career progression in social work. There is no career progression in social work. That's not entirely true. I'll give you an example of myself. I qualified more than 18 years ago. I qualified in 2004 and I've been practicing since then. I've had many opportunities of practicing social work in many different countries. And for me, that not only gave me opportunities to travel and see the world and so forth, but also it gave me opportunities to actually rise within the profession to a position of actually managing a team, for example. So I think this is a big misconception to say there's no career progression in social work. The social work qualification is quite versatile. That's one thing for sure to mention as well. It allows you to work across teams. For example, if you want to work in child protection, if you want to work in assessment team, if you want to work in youth justice, if you want to work in mental health, if you want to work in a charity organization, if you want to work in UN, if you want to work in non-governmental organizations, you can work anywhere as long as you are registered to work in that particular jurisdiction. You can work. For example, myself, I've worked in 3 different jurisdictions. I've worked in Zimbabwe for a couple of years. I've worked in Namibia for about 10 years, and I've been working in England for almost 8 years now. So, in terms of saying there's no career progression, that's not entirely true. If you look at it, I think in some local authorities, let me talk about London because I've practiced in London for quite a while. You find that in some local authorities, when one qualifies as a social worker, it's easy for them to rise within 3 years of qualifying. You could be promoted to a senior role as a senior social worker, and then from a senior social worker to a senior practitioner or advanced practitioner, and then from there, from an assistant to be an assistant team manager, from assistant team manager to team manager, from team manager, some depending with the local authority you're working in, some you would rise to be strategic manager, or an operational lead, or in some local authorities to be a service manager, or in some local authorities to actually be head of service. So it all depends with which local authority you're working in, and also with how tenacious you are in terms of you wanting to progress within your career as well. Because remember, nothing comes on a silver platter. So you need to go out there, apply for it, work for it, prepare yourself for the interview, and actually, get the job, and then you can actually prove that you are able to do the job. So yeah, if you look at it really, for those who get promoted to senior roles, you might actually end up being an assistant director. You might end up being a director. I've worked with many people who have actually rose through the ranks. Some of them are now service managers. Some of them are actually heads of service. Some of them are actually assistant directors. Some of them principal social workers. So I've busted that myth now. Myth number 3. So moving on then, the fourth myth which I want to talk about today is where people say social workers do interfere in people's lives. I've read about this, which is indicative of the fact that people are actually misinformed about what social work is. People are misinformed about the work that we do. First and foremost, what I need to mention about this kind of statement is it's misinforming people, because remember, we do, like I mentioned in point number 1, we do respect people's lives, we do respect people's privacy according to the Human Rights Act and all that. Remember, there's Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, which talks about the right to private life and all that. We do respect that. However, I need to point out that as social workers, we are mandated by the Children's Act of 1989 to make sure that we discharge our mandate wherever we are employed. We have got a duty to safeguard, we've got a duty to look into the concerns which have been relayed to the local authority, and hence that needs to be done. Remember, if you are working in that particular position, if you were in my position, you would actually be expected to be doing the work expected of that particular position. So it's not to necessarily say, we like to interfere in people's lives, but where there is a cause of concern to say a particular child may be at risk or is at risk of significant harm, then naturally you should understand that social workers need to be stepping in, to be investigating that, to be looking into that, and where support is required, support is put in place. And remember, we don't work in isolation. We work with the police, we work with colleagues from health, we work with colleagues from education to make sure that we bring about those changes that are needed. Remember, we are not only there to pinpoint the problems, but social workers were also there to support families, to make sure that where there is need, where a child is actually in need of support, the support is put in place after an assessment has been completed. So that point, I think that myth has been busted then. Moving on to myth number 5. I hear in some platforms, especially on social media, where people look down upon the profession of social work. But I think people need to realize that this is a regulated profession. In many jurisdictions now, it is a protected title. Someone can't just call themselves a social worker. So this myth, I've heard people writing on social media that anyone can call themselves a social worker. That's not true. That's not correct. You can't call yourself a social worker when you haven't studied social work. Whether you have a diploma or a degree or a master's degree, you need to have earned the qualification, and you need to be registered to call yourself a social worker. Remember, in England, for example, it's a protected title. In South Africa, where I'm also registered, it's a protected title. In Namibia, where I'm also registered to social worker, it's a protected title. In Australia, where I'm also registered social worker, it's a protected title. So you realize that in reality, it is a regulated profession in most jurisdictions world over, including United States, including some of the countries that you think possibly they are third world countries, including Zimbabwe. It's a protected title. You can't call yourself a social worker when you haven't qualified with a degree or with a diploma or with a master's degree in social work, or you are not registered to practice. You might have the degree, but if you are not registered to practice, you can't call yourself a social worker. So to be a qualified social worker, you need to complete an accredited degree and register with the relevant professional body for you to call yourself a social worker. So myth number 5, busted. Myth number 6, all social workers are women. I think this is quite laughable because it depends with where you are or which jurisdiction you are practicing. One thing I found out when I moved over to England was that social work was predominantly dominated by women. That's for sure. But however, if you look at other jurisdictions, especially from Zimbabwe, where I came from, you'll find that it's kind of a balanced, fair and fair number of males versus females who are qualified social workers and registered social workers. So it's not always the case that all social workers are women. There are also men. Myself, I'm a man. I'm a social worker. There are many men out there who are social workers. So it's important to mention that it's a diverse field, and both men and women contribute significantly in it. And both men and women can start the social work, can qualify as a social worker, can practice as a social worker after you get registered. So those gender stereotypes don't accurately represent our profession. Myth number 6 busted. And then myth number 6 is that social work is a lonely profession. That's not entirely true. Or some people say I'll be on my own in some tough situations when I'm practicing and so forth. That's not entirely true. Remember, I mentioned earlier on that social work is a profession. We don't work in isolation. We work with the police. We work with our colleagues from health. We work with our colleagues from education. Our colleagues from domestic violence, abuse, support centers, migrant help centers, and all other charitable organizations that we do work with. So it's a multidisciplinary. We do take a multidisciplinary approach to the way that we work. So there's no way you will be working in isolation. So if you're a social worker, for example, who is going to be in an assessment team or a child safeguarding team, you are the lead social worker, but remember, you don't work in isolation. You work with other professionals who will be there to support you, make sure that child protection plan or that child need plan is effectively progressed. So it doesn't necessarily mean that all those actions which will be on the plan is for the social worker to achieve. Remember, it's a collaborative approach, including the family also. They should be taking part in making sure that they progress that CP plan or they progress that child in need plan and make sure that things actually move forward. So remember, the bottom line is you are not alone in this profession. Even where you feel that possibly you are anxious, you are scared to be going into family, into a household, remember, you don't go. You can actually ask your colleagues, to actually go with you. Remember, there's also situations where there are joint visits with the police. So you are not alone. You work together, to support individuals and families, and it's not the situation where you're gonna be alone in most situations, really. Right. So moving on then to the next point, which says the next myth, which says social workers only deal with child protection. That's not entirely true. Though it appears the majority do work with children and families, but remember, child protection is an essential part of the work that we do, but we also work in areas like mental health, domestic abuse, disability services, adult social care. So, basically the roles are kind of diverse and multifaceted. So there's no way you can actually generalize things and say, I only know social workers working with children and families or in child protection. It doesn't necessarily, go like that. And then the next point or the next myth is that social workers are only employed by local authorities, which is not entirely true as well, or which says social workers are only employed by the government, which is not entirely true as well. I think the reality on the ground is the majority may be employed by the local authorities, but remember, it's not all of them who are employed directly by the local authority. Maybe a few are employed directly by the local authority as direct employees of the local authority or of various trusts which are mushrooming now all over the country. However, Remember, there are also social workers working in the charitable field. There are also social workers working in the humanitarian field. There are also social workers working even in UN agencies. There are also social workers working even in some non-governmental child protection agencies like Childline and NSPCC, for example. So you find that social workers, we do work in various settings really, and this includes hospitals, this includes schools, this includes charity organizations, even private organizations. So the opportunities are just broad, diverse, and it's a multifaceted profession really. I also know a few social workers who are actually working abroad, who are not even working in England. They're working abroad, working in non-government organizations, international organizations like Oxfam, World Vision, and all that. So they are not only not employed by local authorities. And then the next myth says social workers won't help me get care for my elder relative. They are not there to do that. That's not entirely true. Remember, if there are social workers who are employed to work in adult social care, that's their primary role, to make sure that the needs of adults who are not able to look after themselves, or who are not able to take care of their own, to take care of themselves, are actually looked into, they are assessed, and then care packages actually put in place. So, there are social workers who work with adults, and then there are social workers who work with children and families. So, we are not gatekeepers as such, but we are there to facilitate change. We are there to facilitate support being put in place where it is required, to make sure that we enhance people's well-being and quality of life is actually improved. With those 10 myths, I think I've answered some of the myths that you could have been holding for a while now, and I'm sure you have benefited something from this video. So if you are planning to study social work, please, I would encourage you to do that. Research more about social work. Look at some of the videos which I've posted on this YouTube video, on this YouTube channel, and you'll be able to actually grasp more in terms of understanding what social work is. And remember, social work, it's a rewarding profession. I wouldn't want to lie. It's a rewarding profession, and we are there to positively impact people's lives. And you need to be passionate about what you do, and you never know, it might be the right path for you. With those few words, I just want to say thank you so much for taking your time to tune in and watch this video, and hopefully you've gained something. Thank you so much.